There are moments that test the very soul of who we are, when we witness cruelty and must choose between silence and action. In the small frontier town of Redemption Falls, such a moment arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning when three bandits cornered a helpless grandmother outside the general store. They mocked her, they threatened her, and every person on that street turned away in fear. These outlaws had terrorized the territory for months, and no one dared stand against them. But from the distant mountain trails came a lone figure, a man who still believed some things were worth fighting for. What this mountain man did next would become a story told for generations. Could one man's courage truly make a difference? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe. Tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The town of Redemption Falls sat in a narrow valley where the canyon walls rose like ancient sentinels, their red-brown faces scarred by wind and time. Once, this had been a place of promise. Gold strikes in the surrounding hills had drawn families west, men with dreams and women with hope. They'd built a proper town, a church with a white steeple, a general store with glass windows shipped all the way from St. Louis, a schoolhouse where children learned their letters and numbers. The main street had been wide enough for wagon trains, lined with false-fronted buildings that spoke of ambition and permanence. But the gold had played out faster than anyone expected. The mining companies pulled up stakes and moved on, leaving behind empty claims and broken equipment. Most of the families followed. The ones who stayed, ranchers mostly, and those too poor or too stubborn to start over somewhere else, watched their town shrink year by year. The bank closed. The hotel fell into disrepair. Tumbleweeds gathered against the boardwalks, and dust devils danced through empty lots where homes had once stood. Still, there was life here. Enough ranches in the surrounding territory to keep the general store in business. Enough people to fill the church on Sundays, though the congregation had dwindled to barely 30 souls. The saloon stayed open because men would always need a place to drink and forget their troubles. And there was still a sheriff, though Tom Brennan wore his badge more from habit than conviction these days. The real trouble had started 6 months back when the Shadow Creek gang rode in. At first, they were just another group of drifters passing through, but Colt Ramsey, their leader, had recognized what everyone else missed. A dying town meant easy pickings. No territorial marshal within 100 miles. No telegraph to call for help. Just scattered ranches, monthly supply wagons, and people too worn down to fight back. They'd set up camp in the abandoned mining structures up Shadow Creek Canyon. Started small, robbing a supply wagon here, rustling cattle there. When Sheriff Brennan rode out, to confront them, they'd sent him back with a warning and a broken arm. After that, the law in Redemption Falls existed in name only. The gang came and went as they pleased, taking what they wanted, roughing up anyone who objected. They never killed anyone. Ramsey was smart enough to know that would bring federal attention, but they made life hard enough that folks walked on eggshells whenever the gang was in town. Pearl Henderson, who ran the saloon, said it best one Sunday after church. We're living on borrowed time in a borrowed town, waiting for someone else to decide our fate. Among those who remained was Martha Whitfield, 72 years old and too deeply rooted to be moved. She'd come to Redemption Falls as a bride of 19. Her husband Jacob fresh out of the cavalry and newly appointed as town marshal. They'd raised 2 sons in the little house behind the church. Jacob had kept the peace for 20 years, respected and fair, until a drifter's bullet found him during a bank robbery that had netted the shooter all of $47. Martha had buried her husband in the cemetery on the hill, then buried both sons within 5 years. One to fever, one to a mining accident. She'd taught school for 30 years after that, shaping the minds of children who'd grown up and moved away to better prospects. Now she lived alone in that same house, tending her garden, reading her leather Bible with its worn pages and marginalia in her late husband's hand, and refusing every well-meaning suggestion that she leave for somewhere safer. "Jacob and I built our life here," she'd tell anyone who asked. "My boys are buried here. This is where I'll rest when my time comes. I'm not afraid of men like Ramsay. I've seen harder men than him brought low." The town respected Martha, loved her even. She represented something they'd lost, a connection to better days, to the time when Redemption Falls had been more than a dying settlement. When she walked to the general store each week, people tipped their hats and asked after her health. Children she'd taught, now grown with children of their own, checked on her regularly. She was the town's grandmother, its living memory. Ezra Cole knew none of this history when he'd first ridden into Redemption Falls 3 years ago. He'd come down from the high country looking for basic supplies: coffee, salt, ammunition, flour. A man could live off the land if he knew how, and Ezra knew how, but there were some things you couldn't hunt or gather. So once a month, he made the 2-day ride from his cabin in the mountains to restock. He never stayed long. Bought what he needed, exchanged pleasantries if someone spoke to him, then rode back into the wilderness. People learned not to ask too many questions. He was polite but distant, friendly but unreachable. His eyes carried the look of a man who'd seen too much and wanted to see less. His weathered face and calloused hands spoke of hard living, but there was something else too. A careful way of moving, an awareness of his surroundings that marked him as more than just another mountain hermit. Some of the older folks recognized something familiar in him. Pearl thought he might be running from the law, though she admitted he didn't have that hunted look. Doc Henley, who'd practiced medicine in 5 territories and seen all kinds, guessed military background. Cavalry, maybe, he'd mused to Sheriff Brennan once. Or a scout. Man moves like he's used to trouble. The truth was simpler and more painful than any of them guessed. Ezra Cole had been a United States Marshal for 28 years. He'd tracked killers across 3 territories, brought in rustlers and bank robbers, testified at trials that put men on gallows. He'd been good at his work, patient, relentless, fair. His reputation had grown until the name Ezra Cole meant something from Montana to New Mexico. Outlaws knew to ride wide around areas where he was working. Honest folks slept better knowing he was on the job. Then Sarah died. It had happened 15 years ago, but Ezra still counted the days sometimes. He'd been tracking a gang of stage robbers 3 weeks into hard country. Sarah was visiting her sister in Silver City, supposed to be safe. But banks get robbed, even in small towns. She'd been in the wrong place when desperate men with guns came through the door. They'd shot her when she'd tried to help an elderly teller who'd moved too slow. She died on the bank floor, and Ezra had been 200 miles away, chasing men who'd stolen $300 and a strongbox. He'd caught them eventually, did his duty, testified, watched them hang. Then he'd turned in his badge, sold their house, and ridden into the mountains. He'd built a cabin near a spring-fed creek, high enough that snow trapped him in for months each winter. He'd made peace with silence, with his own company, with memories that grew softer around the edges as years passed. The town of Redemption Falls had become his only thread connecting him to civilization. Once a month, no more. He'd ride in, restock, ride out. He noticed the Shadow Creek Gang's presence the same way he noticed everything. Catalogued it, assessed it, filed it away. Not his problem, not his badge, not his responsibility anymore. He'd spent 15 years learning to walk past trouble, and he'd gotten good at it. Until that Tuesday morning when he saw 3 men surrounding an elderly woman outside the general store, and everything he'd buried came rushing back like floodwater through a broken dam. The silver pocket watch in his vest, his father's watch, carried through a lifetime of keeping time and keeping order, seemed to beat against his ribs like a second heart. Some things, it whispered in a voice that sounded like his father's, like his own. Some things you don't walk away from. Some things demand you remember who you are. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. Ezra had risen before dawn, fed his horse, and begun the long ride down from the high country. The trail wound through pine forests that still held pockets of snow in their deepest shadows, then descended through scrub oak and juniper as the elevation dropped. By the time the sun cleared the eastern peaks, he could see Redemption Falls spread out below him in the valley, looking smaller and more fragile than it had any right to be. He'd tied his horse outside the general store just after 9 o'clock. The animal needed water and rest after the journey, and Ezra had his usual list of supplies to purchase: coffee, flour, salt, ammunition for his rifle. Simple things that marked the rhythm of his solitary life. He'd noticed the 3 horses already tied at the rail, spotted them the way he noticed everything, catalogued them without conscious thought. The mounts were well fed, their tack expensive, not the gear of working cowboys. Inside the store, he'd nodded to Henry Bartlett, the proprietor, and begun gathering his supplies. Through the front window, he'd watched Martha Whitfield emerge from the store across the street, her arms full of parcels wrapped in brown paper. She moved slowly, carefully, the way people do when their bones ache and their balance isn't what it used to be. The morning sun caught her white hair, making it gleam like silver. That's when the 3 men stepped off the boardwalk. Jake Snake Eyes. Garrett was the first to reach her. He'd earned his nickname from a pair of distinctive dice he carried and his habit of betting on anything. He was lean and mean, with a face that suggested cruelty came naturally to him. Behind him came Billy Crane, younger and stupider, always looking to impress. Tommy Voss brought up the rear, the quietest of the 3, but no less dangerous for it. They'd been drinking. Ezra could see it in their swagger, hear it in the volume of their voices as they called out to Martha. He set down the bag of coffee beans he'd been examining and moved closer to the window. "Well now, what do we have here?" Jake's voice carried across the street. "Old woman shouldn't be carrying such heavy loads. Might hurt yourself." Martha tried to step around them. "Good morning, gentlemen. Please excuse me." Billy moved to block her path. "Didn't say you could leave, did we? Where's your manners?" The street wasn't empty. A dozen people were within sight. Shopkeepers sweeping boardwalks, a woman hanging laundry, 2 men loading a wagon. Every one of them saw what was happening. Every one of them looked away. Ezra's hand had found the watch in his vest pocket without him realizing it. His thumb traced the engraved surface, feeling the familiar pattern of wear. Through the window, he watched Tommy knock the parcels from Martha's arms. They hit the dirt, scattering. A jar of preserves shattered, spreading dark red across the dust like blood. "Oh my," Tommy said with mock concern. "Look what you went and did. Clumsy old bird." Martha bent to gather her belongings, and that's when Jake spotted what she'd been clutching against her chest, the worn leather Bible. He snatched it from her hands before she could react. "What's this now? You think praying's gonna help you?" He waved it above his head, laughing. "Maybe I should have a look, see if there's any money pressed between these pages." "Please." Martha's voice was steady despite her fear. "That belonged to my husband. It's all I have left of him." "That right?" Jake thumbed through the pages, tearing some deliberately. "Looks like just an old book to me. Could use it to start our campfire tonight. Pages that burn real good." Martha reached for it and Billy shoved her back. She stumbled, nearly fell. Only Tommy's arm shooting out kept her from hitting the ground. But it wasn't kindness. He held her upright so they could continue their sport. Now careful there, Grandma. At your age, a fall could kill you." Billy laughed at his own joke. "Course, maybe that'd be a mercy. You got any money in those pockets? We could take it off your hands, save you the trouble of carrying it around." Martha's face had gone pale, but her chin stayed up. "I have nothing of value except that Bible. Please return it to me." "Nothing of value?" Jake pretended to be offended. "You saying God's word ain't valuable?" That's blasphemy, that is. Maybe we should teach you some respect. Inside the general store, Henry Bartlett had gone very still. He didn't look at Ezra, didn't look at the window. Just stood there staring at his own hands on the counter. Ezra looked down the street toward the sheriff's office. The door was open. He could see Tom Brennan's silhouette inside, standing at the window, watching. The sheriff met Ezra's eyes for just a moment, then stepped back into the shadows of his office. The door swung shut. Something twisted in Ezra's chest. Not surprise, exactly. He'd seen good men fail before, seen fear turn decent people into cowards. But seeing it happen here, now with Martha Whitfield trembling in the street while 3 drunken thugs terrorized her for sport, something in him cracked open. He was moving before he'd made a conscious decision. Out the door, down the steps, into the street. The walking stick he always carried, hand-carved ash wood, smooth from years of use, was steady in his right hand. His left hung loose at his side. The morning sun was behind him. Jake noticed his shadow first, stretching long across the dirt. He turned, squinting into the light. "Well, hell, boys, look what we got here. Another old-timer." Ezra stopped 10 feet away. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "Let the woman go." Billy laughed. "Oh, what, Grandpa? You gonna beat us with your walking stick?" "I'm going to ask once more." Ezra's tone was conversational, almost gentle. "Return her Bible. Let her gather her things. Walk away." Tommy had his hand near his gun now. "You know who we ride with, old man? Shadow Creek Gang. Colt Ramsey's boys. You really want this kind of trouble?" "I'm 68 years old," Ezra said. "I've buried a wife, tracked killers through 3 territories, and lived alone in the mountains for 15 years. I've seen trouble you couldn't imagine in your worst nightmares. So I'll ask you one final time. Are you going to do the right thing here? Or am I going to have to make you?" Jake's eyes narrowed. Something in Ezra's voice didn't match his appearance. "You talk tough for a man who's outnumbered 3-1. Numbers don't mean much if you don't know how to use them." Ezra took another step forward. "But I'll give you credit. You're smart enough to be scared right now, even if you don't know it yet." Billy's hand had found his gun. He drew it with a flourish, pointing it at Ezra with the careless confidence of someone who'd never been truly tested. "How about I just shoot you and save us all the—" He didn't finish the sentence. Ezra's walking stick moved so fast it seemed to blur. The tip caught Billy's wrist with surgical precision. The gun spun from his grip, landed in the dirt 6 feet away. Before Billy could process what had happened, Ezra had reversed the stick and brought the other end up under his chin. Not hard enough to break bone, but hard enough to lift him onto his toes. "Never point a gun at someone unless you're ready to use it," Ezra said quietly. "And never assume an old man with a walking stick is helpless." Tommy was already reaching for his weapon when Ezra's boot came down on his hand, pinning it to his gun belt. The walking stick stayed under Billy's chin, but now there was something different about the way Ezra held it. A slight twist, and 4 inches of steel blade emerged from the top of the carved wood. The point rested against Jake's throat, right above his Adam's apple. "Drop the Bible," Ezra said. Jake let it fall. His face had gone white. "You're dead, old man. Ramsey's going to hear about this." "I expect he will." Ezra increased the pressure slightly. A bead of blood appeared where the blade touched skin. "But right now, I want you to listen carefully. You're going to help this woman gather her things. You're going to apologize, and then you're going to mount your horses and ride out of town. If I ever see you back here, if I ever hear of you troubling anyone in this territory again, I won't be so polite next time." "You can't. I can." The blade pressed a fraction deeper. "And I will. Now move." 5 minutes later, Martha's parcels were gathered. Her Bible was back in her hands, and 3 very sober outlaws were riding east at a gallop. The street was still silent, but now people were staring openly. At Ezra, at Martha. at the small spot of blood in the dust where Jake had stood. Ezra wiped his blade on his trouser leg and sheathed it back into the walking stick. He picked up Billy's fallen revolver, checked the cylinder, and tucked it into his belt. Then he turned to Martha. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" She was clutching her Bible to her chest, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, but she was smiling. No, I'm fine. Thank you. I don't know how to. No need." He bent to pick up a package she'd missed. "Let me help you home." As they walked together toward her house behind the church, Ezra felt the weight of dozens of eyes on his back. He'd crossed a line he'd sworn never to cross again. He'd stepped back into a world he'd left behind 15 years ago. And somewhere up in Shadow Creek Canyon, 3 frightened men were about to tell Colt Ramsey that someone in Redemption Falls had made them look like fools. The watch in Ezra's vest ticked steadily, counting down to the moment when everything would change. Ezra didn't return to his cabin that night. Instead, he took a room at the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who asked no questions and provided clean sheets and a hot meal. He needed to be in town, needed to understand what he was working with before Ramsey made his move. Because Ramsey would make a move. Ezra was as certain of that as he was of sunrise. After supper, he walked the town in the fading light. Redemption Falls wasn't large. You could walk from one end to the other in 10 minutes. The main street ran roughly east-west, lined with the usual collection of frontier buildings. The general store anchored the west end. The saloon sat across from it, 2 stories with a balcony that overlooked the street. The church occupied a small rise to the north, its white steeple visible from most of the town. The sheriff's office, the livery, a few other shops, and perhaps 30 houses scattered in the spaces between. He noted sight lines, cover positions, choke points, old habits reasserting themselves. If you had to defend this place with limited numbers, where would you position your people? The saloon's upper floor offered good overwatch. The general store had thick walls. The church commanded the high ground. The livery could be a fallback position, but all of that assumed you had people willing to fight. Doc Henley found him standing in the middle of the street as twilight deepened into night. The doctor was in his 60s, white-haired and stoop-shouldered, but his eyes were sharp. "Heard what you did today," Henley said without preamble. "Foolish or brave, haven't decided which." "Can't it be both?" "Usually is." The doctor pulled out a pipe, began packing it with tobacco. "Colt Ramsey won't let this pass. You know that." "I'm counting on it." Henley paused in his pipe-lighting ritual. "Counting on it? Most men would be running for the hills. Most men aren't planning to make a stand." "A stand." The doctor got his pipe lit, drew deeply. "You and what army?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Ezra gestured down the empty street. "This town has, 60 people? Maybe 70? About that. More if you count the scattered ranches." "How many men? Of fighting age?" Henley considered. 20, maybe 25 if you're generous with your definition of fighting age. But wanting to fight and being able to fight are different things. Most folks here are farmers, shopkeepers. They're not fighters. "Neither were the Minutemen at Lexington," Ezra said quietly. "But they fought anyway. That was different. That was revolution, independence, all those grand ideals. This is survival. That's a pretty strong ideal, too." They walked together toward the saloon. Pearl Henderson was inside, wiping down the bar. She looked up when they entered, studied Ezra with the frank assessment of a woman who'd spent decades reading men. "You're either the bravest man I've met or the stupidest," she announced. "Haven't decided which yet." "So I've been told." Ezra took a seat at the bar. "Coffee, if you have it." "This is a saloon. We serve whiskey." "Then I'll have whiskey." She poured him 2 fingers of amber liquid. "On the house. For standing up to those bastards." Been 6 months since anyone in this town showed that kind of spine. She poured herself a matching measure. To spine. They drank. The whiskey was rough but honest. I need to know something, Ezra said. If Ramsay comes back, and he will, how many people here would be willing to fight? Pearl and Doc Henley exchanged glances. Pearl spoke first. Define willing. Willing to stand their ground, to defend their homes, their neighbors, to not run when it gets hard. That's a tall order, Pearl said. Most folks here have been beaten down for months. Fear becomes a habit after a while. So does courage if you give people a reason to find it. Doc Henley leaned against the bar. You really think you can organize a defense? Against 12 armed outlaws who've been riding together for years? I think the alternative is letting them burn this town to the ground and kill anyone they feel like killing. Ezra met their eyes. I've been running from this kind of fight for 15 years. Thought I could find peace by hiding in the mountains. But peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of justice. And there's no justice in watching good people suffer while bad men prosper. Pearl poured herself another drink. You sound like my late husband. He was cavalry, talked about duty and honor and standing for something. She smiled sadly. He's buried in that cemetery up the hill next to all the other fools who believe the same thing. Being dead doesn't make them fools, Ezra said gently. It makes them casualties. There's a difference. Not to the dead there isn't. No, but to the living there is. He finished his whiskey. To the children who grow up in towns where good people stood up. To the families who can sleep at night because someone was willing to draw a line and say, no further. The door opened. Sheriff Brennan entered, saw them, hesitated. Join us, Sheriff, Ezra called. We're having a philosophical discussion about the nature of courage. Brennan approached slowly, like a man walking to his own execution. I owe you an apology. You owe Martha Whitfield an apology. I was just passing through. Ezra gestured to the stool beside him. But what's past is past. What matters is what comes next. They're coming back, aren't they? The gang. Yes. When? Soon. My guess is Saturday, market day. Maximum witnesses, maximum impact. Brennan sat heavily. We can't fight them. We don't have the numbers, the weapons, the training. We have this town. We know every alley, every building, every sight line. We have home ground advantage. Ezra leaned forward. I've fought outnumbered before, Sheriff. Numbers matter, but they're not everything. Motivation matters. Strategy matters. Surprise matters. You're talking about an ambush. I'm talking about using what we have against what they expect. Ezra pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, began sketching a rough map of the town. They'll come in expecting fear, expecting people to scatter or submit. What if instead they ride into a coordinated defense? Doc Henley leaned in to look at the map. You're serious about this? Deadly serious. Pearl studied the sketch. You'd need lookouts here and here, riflemen on the saloon balcony, maybe in the church tower, someone to cover the approaches. Exactly. Ezra marked positions. And we'd need to evacuate non-combatants, women, children, anyone who can't or won't fight. Get them to safety before the shooting starts. There's a canyon 5 miles north, Pearl said. Narrow entrance, easy to defend, fresh water. We could move people there. Sheriff Brennan was staring at the map like it was a snake. You're planning a war. I'm planning a defense. There's a difference. Ezra met his eyes. Question is, are you in? The silence stretched. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the saloon's windows. Somewhere a dog barked. Normal night sounds in a town that was about to become very abnormal. Brennan's hand moved to his badge, touched it like a talisman. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. My daughter's in Denver, at a boarding school. If I die, She's got an aunt who'll take her in. She'll be okay. Sheriff, I'm in. He looked up, and there was something new in his eyes. Fear, yes, but also determination. I've been wearing this badge like it's decoration. Time I remembered what it means. Ezra extended his hand. Brennan shook it. Pearl poured them all another drink. Well then, she said, if we're going to war, we better start planning. Saturday's only 3 days away. They worked late into the night, 3 unlikely conspirators mapping out a defense that would either save Redemption Falls or turn it into a graveyard. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles, counting down to a reckoning that would test every person in that valley. In his pocket, Ezra's father's watch kept perfect time. Wednesday morning broke clear and cold. Ezra was up before dawn, old military habits pulling him from sleep while the town still dreamed. He walked to the cemetery on the hill as the first light touched the eastern peaks. The oak tree Martha had mentioned stood alone near the summit, its branches bare for winter but strong. Jacob Whitfield's grave was marked with a simple stone. The inscription read, Marshal Jacob Whitfield, 1821-1865. He stood for what was right. Beside it, 2 smaller stones marked the graves of his sons. Ezra stood there for a long moment, hat in hand, thinking about men who'd worn badges and the women who'd buried them. Came to pay your respects? Martha's voice startled him. She'd approached from the path below, carrying fresh flowers despite the season. Seemed right, Ezra said. Before what's coming. She placed the flowers at the base of Jacob's stone, her movements gentle and practiced. He'd have liked you. You have the same stubborn streak he did, the same inability to walk past wrong without trying to fix it. Is that what got him killed? No. What got him killed was bad luck and a frightened man with a gun. But what made him worth remembering was that he tried. She straightened, looked at Ezra directly. Pearl told me what you're planning. The evacuation, the defense. I'm not asking you to leave, he said. I know this is your home. I'm not leaving. I already told you that. She smiled. Someone needs to ring the church bell when they come, and someone needs to tend the wounded after. Martha, don't. Her voice was firm. Don't tell me I'm too old or it's too dangerous. Jacob spent 20 years protecting this town. My boys grew up here. I taught school here for 30 years. This ground is soaked with my life, Ezra. I'm not abandoning it now. He nodded, understanding. Some things ran deeper than safety. By mid-morning, word had spread. The people of Redemption Falls gathered at the church, summoned by Sheriff Brennan's request. They filled the pews with the nervous energy of folks who knew something important was happening but weren't sure what. Ezra stood at the front beside the sheriff. Pearl and Doc Henley flanked them. Martha sat in the first row, her Bible in her lap. The sight of these 5, the mountain man, the scared sheriff, the saloon owner, the doctor, and the school teacher, unified in purpose, gave the gathering a weight it might not otherwise have had. Brennan spoke first, his voice shaking slightly but growing stronger as he went. He told them what was coming. About Colt Ramsey's reputation, about the likely retaliation for Tuesday's confrontation, about the choice they all faced. Then Ezra took over. He didn't sugarcoat it, told them the odds, the dangers, the very real possibility that people would die. But he also told them about dignity, about standing for something, about the difference between surviving and living. I'm not asking anyone to fight who doesn't want to, he said. There's no shame in protecting your family by leaving. There's a canyon north of here where you can wait this out safely. But for those who want to stay, who want to defend what's theirs, I'm offering to help organize that defense. I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. A rancher named Tom Crawford stood. He was in his 40s, weathered by years of hard work. You're asking us to go up against professional killers. I'm asking you to defend your homes. There's a difference. Is there? when we're just as dead either way." "You're already dead," Pearl interjected, standing. "You just haven't admitted it yet. We've been dying slowly for 6 months, giving away pieces of ourselves every time we let those bastards take what they want. At least this way we die on our feet." "Easy for you to say," someone muttered. "You don't have children to worry about." "No," Pearl said quietly. "I don't. Mine died of fever 10 years ago, but I remember what it was like to want a safe world for them, and you don't get that by bowing your head and hoping wolves will show mercy." A younger man stood, Michael Harrington, who ran the livery. "I'll fight. I'm tired of being afraid in my own town." "Count me in," said another voice. Then another. In the end, 8 men volunteered. Not many, but more than Ezra had expected. He took their names, assessed their abilities with questions about shooting experience and physical capability. Most were adequate with rifles. None were trained fighters, but they were motivated, and that counted for something. The non-combatants, 17 women and children, plus elderly folks like Old Man Peterson who couldn't hold a rifle steady anymore, would evacuate to the canyon on Friday night. A handful of women with frontier experience volunteered to stay and help. Pearl, Martha, and 2 sisters named Hannah and Ruth, who'd grown up on a ranch and could shoot as well as any man. Thursday and Friday became a blur of preparation. Ezra drilled the volunteers in basic tactics: how to use cover, how to create crossfire, how not to shoot each other in the chaos. He positioned them throughout the town, gave each one a specific role and fallback position. They inventoried weapons and ammunition, discovering they were shorter on both than he'd hoped. Doc Henley set up a makeshift hospital in the church, stocking supplies for the wounded he knew were coming. Martha helped, her steady hands and calm demeanor a comfort to the volunteers who stopped by to check on the preparations. Pearl fortified the saloon, boarding up windows on the ground floor while leaving shooting ports. She moved her best whiskey to the cellar and placed rifles at strategic points on the second floor. "If I'm going to war," she declared, "at least I'll do it from my own castle." Sheriff Brennan surprised everyone, including himself. He took to the planning with an intensity that suggested his eyes was trying to redeem months of failure in a few days. He knew the gang's patterns, their habits, the way they operated. That intelligence proved invaluable in predicting how Ramsey would approach. Friday afternoon, Ezra gathered everyone for a final briefing. He went over the plan one more time, answered questions, made sure each person understood their role. When he finished, he looked at the faces around him. Scared faces, determined faces, the faces of ordinary people preparing to do something extraordinary. "Tomorrow morning, some of you might die," he said quietly. "I won't lie about that, but whether you live or die, you'll do it as free people defending what's yours. That's worth something. That's worth everything." As the sun set Friday evening, the evacuees left for the canyon. A quiet procession of wagons and walkers, children clutching mothers, elderly folks taking perhaps their last look at homes they might never see again. Martha stood on her porch and watched them go, her Bible in her hands, her face set like stone. The defenders settled into position as darkness fell. The town that had always seemed too empty now felt impossibly vast, full of shadows and silence. Somewhere out in that darkness, 12 men were preparing to ride, and in the morning, one way or another, Redemption Falls would be redeemed or destroyed. Friday night, while the defenders tried to sleep in their positions, Ezra made one final patrol of the town. He needed to see everything with fresh eyes, catch any detail they might have missed. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the empty street. His footsteps echoed in the silence. He was approaching the sheriff's office when he noticed lamplight still burning inside. Through the window, he could see Brennan at his desk, head in his hands. Something about the man's posture, defeated, guilty, made Ezra pause. He pushed open the door without knocking. Brennan's head snapped up, and the expression on his face was pure panic. He tried to cover something on his desk, but it was too late. Ezra had seen it, papers, some kind of ledger or journal spread out under the lamplight. Working late. Ezra kept his voice neutral, but his hand had found the walking stick at his side. Couldn't sleep. Brennan's attempt at casual failed completely. Thought I'd go through some old records. Old records. Ezra moved closer, and Brennan didn't stop him. Couldn't, really. Guilt had frozen him in place. Mind if I take a look? The journal was leather-bound, well-worn, filled with dates and numbers. It took Ezra only a moment to understand what he was seeing. Payments, regular payments listed by date and amount. And next to each one in Brennan's handwriting, brief notations. Payroll schedule for Western Union. Guest list at boarding house, Marshal's patrol route. Supply wagon timing. Ezra's blood went cold. He flipped through the pages. 8 months of entries. The earliest dated back to March. The most recent was from last week. You've been informing for them. It wasn't a question. Brennan's face crumpled. My daughter. She's sick, consumption. The only specialist who could help her is in Denver, and the treatment costs. He stopped, swallowed. I didn't have the money. My salary barely covers food and rent. I was desperate. So you sold out your own town? I never thought anyone would get hurt. I swear it. Ramsey said he just wanted information about shipments, about when travelers were coming through. He said nobody would be harmed if I cooperated. And you believed him? Ezra's voice was sharp as a knife. You believed a man like Colt Ramsey would keep his word. I didn't have a choice. Brennan stood, his hands shaking. You don't understand what it's like to watch your child dying and know you can't save her. To have someone offer you the one thing that might help and know you have to take it even if it means betraying everyone who trusts you. Ezra cut him off. Everyone in this town has been living in fear because of you. Every robbery, every terrorized family, every time the Shadow Creek gang seemed to know exactly where to strike. That was you. I know. Tears were streaming down Brennan's face now. God help me. I know what I've done. I've tried to stop. Last month I told Ramsey I was out, that I couldn't do it anymore. He said if I stopped cooperating, he'd kill Sarah. Sent me a letter describing her room at the boarding school, what dress she wore to church, who her friends were. He could reach her any time he wanted. Ezra wanted to hit him, wanted to drag him into the street and let the town decide his fate, but they didn't have time for that. Saturday was hours away. Does Ramsey know about our plans? No, I haven't told him anything since Tuesday. I swear it. But he'll expect you to have information. He'll expect you to have warned him if we're preparing a defense. Brennan nodded miserably. He sent word Thursday. Wants to know if the town's ready to fight or if people are running scared. I haven't responded. Ezra's mind was racing. This changed everything. Or did it? He looked at the journal again, at 8 months of betrayal documented in careful handwriting. Then he looked at Brennan, broken, ashamed, a man who'd sold his soul for his daughter and found the price was higher than he could bear. Can you still contact them? Brennan looked up, confused. What? The gang. Can you still send them messages? There's a dead drop. A hollow tree south of town. I leave notes there. They pick them up. Ezra was quiet for a moment, thinking through possibilities. Then he made a decision that felt both ruthless and necessary. You're going to send them one more message. I don't understand. You're going to tell Ramsey that the town panicked, that most people have fled, including me, that there's no organized defense, just a handful of scared folks barricaded in their homes. Ezra leaned forward. You're going to tell him exactly what he wants to hear. Understanding dawned on Brennan's face. You want him to come in confident, expecting easy pickings. I want him to underestimate us. If he thinks we're scattered and afraid, he won't take precautions. He'll ride in like he owns the place. spread his men out, make himself vulnerable. Ezra's eyes were hard. We'll get one chance at this, Sheriff. One moment of surprise. After that, it's a straight fight and the odds aren't in our favor. But if we can catch them off guard, it might work. Brennan wiped his face. But if Ramsey finds out I lied to him, if he survives this, your cooperation won't matter anymore. He'll know you chose sides and it wasn't his. Ezra picked up the journal. But if we win, if we actually manage to beat them, then what you've done here, the information you've provided, that might have made the difference. You're giving me a chance to redeem myself. I am giving you a chance to choose which side you're on when it matters most. Ezra tucked the journal into his coat. Everything before this moment was weakness and fear. What you do now, that's who you really are. Brennan sat back down, pulled out paper and pen. His hand shook as he wrote, but the message was clear. Town in panic. Mountain man fled. No defense organized. Easy pickings tomorrow. Come early for best selection. He signed it with the code letter he always used, a simple B that Ramsey would recognize as authentic. There's a lamp at my house, Brennan said quietly. If I put it in the window facing south, that's the signal that there's a message in the drop. Ramsey has someone watching. Then light the lamp. Make sure they find this before dawn. Brennan nodded, took the message. At the door, he turned back. Ezra, thank you. Don't thank me yet. Tomorrow you fight. You don't run, you don't hide, and you don't hold back. You stand with us and you earn back every ounce of trust you threw away. Ezra's voice softened slightly. And when this is over, if we're both still alive, you go to Denver. You see your daughter. You tell her that her father did something brave when it mattered. After Brennan left, Ezra sat alone in the office, the journal heavy in his hands. He thought about trust and betrayal, about how good men could make terrible choices, about the weight of responsibility and the cost of redemption. He thought about Sarah, about the bank robbery that had taken her, about the guilt he'd carried for 15 years because he hadn't been there. Maybe that's why he couldn't bring himself to hate Brennan completely. They'd both failed to protect the people they loved. They'd both been living with that failure ever since. The difference was, tomorrow Brennan would get a chance to make it right. Ezra stood, walked to the window. Across the street he saw Brennan emerge from his house and placed the lamp in, the south-facing window. A moment later he extinguished it briefly, then relit it, the signal. Somewhere out in the darkness, someone was watching. By dawn, Ramsey would have the message. He'd believe his spy had come through one final time. He'd ride into Redemption Falls expecting scattered resistance and easy victory. What he'd find instead would be something very different. Ezra pulled out his father's watch, checked the time. 3 hours until dawn. He wound the watch carefully, listening to the familiar tick that had marked his entire life. The sound was steady, reliable, indifferent to fear or hope or the approaching violence. Time didn't care about the plans of men. It just kept moving forward, second by second, carrying everyone toward whatever fate had in store. He returned the watch to his vest pocket, picked up his rifle, and went to take his position. In a few hours, the sun would rise on Redemption Falls, and when it did, 12 men would ride into town expecting to find victims. Instead, they'd find a reckoning. The leather journal sat on Brennan's desk, a testament to weakness and betrayal, but tomorrow it might also become evidence of something else. Proof that when pushed to choose, even broken men could find the courage to stand on the right side of history. Ezra hoped so, because they were going to need every ounce of courage they could muster. Dawn came slowly to Redemption Falls, the sky lightening from black to gray to pale blue. Ezra watched it from his position on the second floor of the general store, his cavalry rifle resting across his lap. He'd been awake all night, but he didn't feel tired. The approaching confrontation had sharpened his senses the way it always had before battle. Everything seemed clearer, more vivid, as if the world had come into focus Below him, the street was empty. To anyone riding in, the town would look abandoned. But Ezra knew better. Behind every strategic window, in every carefully chosen position, his small force waited. 8 men, 4 women, and 1 former traitor who was about to learn whether redemption was earned or granted. The plan was simple. Let the gang ride in, let them commit to the main street, then spring the trap. Crossfire from elevated positions, no escape routes, quick, brutal, decisive. The key was timing. Too early and they'd scatter. Too late and the gang would reach cover. Everything depended on reading the moment correctly. Pearl was positioned in her saloon, upper floor, with Hannah beside her. Both women had proven themselves capable shots during practice. Doc Henley was in the church with Martha, ready to treat wounded but also armed with a shotgun he'd promised to use if necessary. The church tower held Ruth, the steadiest shot among them all, with a rifle that could reach any point in the street. The 8 men were distributed, 3 in the general store with Ezra, 2 in buildings across the street, 1 in the livery, 2 at the far end of town to prevent escape. Sheriff Brennan had the most exposed position, standing visible in the middle of the street, the bait that would draw them in. It was Brennan's idea, his insistence. "Let me do this," he had said. "Let me be useful for once." Ezra had agreed, but not without misgivings. If Ramsey suspected betrayal, Brennan would be the first to die. But the sheriff seemed almost at peace with that possibility. He'd sent a letter to Denver the night before, using the last westbound stage. In it, he'd told his daughter the truth. All of it. The sickness, the desperation, the betrayal, and finally the attempt to make it right. He'd told her he loved her, and that if she never heard from him again, she should know her father had died trying to be the man he should have been all along. Now he stood in the pre-dawn gloom, badge pinned to his chest, a rifle held loosely in his hands, waiting for the moment that would define or end his life. Michael Harrington, positioned near Ezra, whispered, "You think they'll come?" "They'll come." Ezra had seen the smoke signals at first light, lookouts reporting movement from Shadow Creek Canyon. Question is when. The answer came with the sunrise. Ruth's voice carried down from the church tower, clear and calm. Riders approaching from the east. Count is 12. Coming slow. 12. The entire gang. Ramsey was bringing everyone, confident in the message Brennan had delivered. Confident in his spy's reliability. That confidence would be his downfall. Ezra moved to the window, careful to stay in shadow. He could see them now, a line of riders silhouetted against the rising sun. They weren't hurrying. Why would they? They expected an empty town, scattered resistance at best. This was a victory lap, a chance to prove that challenging the Shadow Creek gang brought only destruction. Colt Ramsey rode at the center, easy to identify by his bearing. Beside him was Pike Dawson, nearly as dangerous. The others flanked them, Jake, Billy, and Tommy among them, along with men whose names Ezra didn't know, but whose intent was clear enough. They entered the town at a walk, spreading out as they came, looking into windows, checking doorways, weapons drawn but held casually, the confidence of predators who'd never met real prey. Brennan stood his ground in the center of the street. Ezra had to admire that. The man looked terrified, which was perfect. If he'd looked brave, Ramsey might have been suspicious. "Well now," Ramsey's voice carried in the morning silence. "Look who stayed behind, our brave sheriff." Brennan's rifle trembled visibly. "Town's evacuated, Ramsey. Ain't nothing here for you. Just move on." "Nothing here." Ramsey laughed, and his men joined in. "I see a town full of buildings we haven't burned yet, supplies we haven't taken, and one cowardly lawman who needs to learn his place." He looked around theatrically. "Where's your mountain man friend? The one with the fancy walking stick?" "Gone. Rode out 2 days ago when he heard you were coming." "Smart man." Ramsey dismounted, and that was the signal. His men swung down from their horses, began spreading out toward the various buildings. They moved like men who'd done this before, coordinating without needing to speak. Professional in their violence. Ezra held up his hand, signaling the others to wait. Not yet. Let them commit. Pike Dawson headed toward the saloon with 3 men. Jake and 2 others approached the general store. Billy moved toward the church with a torch already in hand. They'd brought fire, planning to burn what they couldn't steal. The remaining gang members positioned themselves to cover the street. Ramsey walked toward Brennan with the casual swagger of a man who'd never lost a confrontation. "You know what I think, Sheriff. I think you've outlived your usefulness. Been paying you for months, and what do I got to show for it? A town that's already half dead. Maybe it's time to cut my losses." He raised his pistol, aimed it at Brennan's chest. Martha's voice rang out from the church tower, clear as a bell. "Now!" The brass church bell began to toll. The signal. Everything happened at once. Ezra stood and fired, his shot taking Ramsey's hat clean off his head. The man dove for cover, survival instincts overriding his shock. All around the street, windows erupted with gunfire. The trap was sprung. Jake and his men, approaching the general store, walked directly into crossfire from 3 different positions. One went down immediately. Jake spun, trying to locate the shooters, and took a bullet in the shoulder that spun him around. The 3rd man made it to cover behind a water trough. Pike Dawson's group, almost to the saloon, was caught by Pearl and Hannah firing from the upper floor. Pike himself was fast enough to reach cover, but 2 of his men weren't so lucky. They fell in the dust, one moving, one still. Billy, torch in hand, never made it to the church. Ruth's rifle cracked from the tower, and the torch fell from his hands as he grabbed his leg, screaming. Tommy tried to drag him to cover, but Sheriff Brennan, standing in the middle of the street, the most exposed person in the entire town, raised his rifle and fired. The shot was clean, practiced. Tommy fell. Ramsey, behind a water barrel, was shouting orders. "It's a trap! Fall back to—" But there was nowhere to fall back to. The 2 men Ezra had positioned at the far end of town opened fire, cutting off the retreat. The gang members, still on horseback, tried to ride clear, but Ruth picked off one and Ezra dropped another. Their horses bolted, leaving them stranded in the kill zone. The entire ambush had taken perhaps 30 seconds. Half of Ramsey's gang was down, dead or wounded. The other half was pinned, unable to advance or retreat, caught in a textbook crossfire that left them with no good options. Pike Dawson recognized the situation first. He'd fought in the war, knew tactics when he saw them. He called out to Ramsey, "We got to break out or we're dead." "The church," Ramsey snarled. "Take the church and we have high ground." It was good thinking, but too late. Doc Henley stepped into the church doorway with his shotgun, and the message was clear. Anyone coming up that hill would pay a price. Jake, bleeding from his shoulder, made a desperate charge toward the general store. He'd recognized Ezra's silhouette and wanted revenge more than he wanted survival. He made it 3 steps before Michael Harrington's rifle spoke. Jake went down hard and stayed down. Billy, wounded but still fighting, had recovered his weapon and was shooting wildly toward the church tower. His shots came nowhere close, but the fact he was still fighting gave his remaining companions hope. Until Brennan, still standing impossibly exposed in the center of the street, walked calmly toward him and shot him in the chest at 10 paces. The sheriff's face was set like stone. He ejected the spent shell, loaded another round, and turned to face the rest of the gang. A man who'd spent 8 months being a coward was making up for it in one terrible morning. "Put down your weapons," Ezra called out. "You're beaten. No shame in surrender." For a moment, it seemed like it might work. Several gang members looked ready to quit, but Ramsey, bleeding from a graze on his cheek where a bullet had come too close, wasn't done. "You think this is over?" he screamed. "You think killing a few of my men makes you heroes?" He fired toward the church, the bullet striking the white steeple, and Martha rang the bell again. Not as a signal this time, but as an answer. A declaration that this town was still standing, still fighting, still defiant. Pike made his move then, leading 3 men in a coordinated rush toward the church. They moved fast, using cover well, and for a moment it looked like they might make it. Doc Henley fired his shotgun, and 1 man fell. Ruth's rifle cracked twice, another man down. But Pike and 1 other made it to the base of the hill, started climbing toward the church door. Ezra dropped his rifle and grabbed his walking stick. He was moving before he'd fully formed the thought, out the door and down the stairs, into the street where bullets still whined and men still died. He couldn't let them take the church. Martha was there. Doc Henley was there. If the gang got inside, got hostages, everything would fall apart. He ran like a man half his age, the years and the solitude falling away, leaving only the marshal he'd once been. The walking stick felt light in his hands. Behind him, he heard Pearl shouting something, heard more shots, heard the chaos of a battle that had stopped being an ambush and become a brutal, close-quarters fight for survival. Pike saw him coming and smiled, a terrible smile. He'd wanted to face the man who'd started all this. Now he'd get his chance. The sun had fully risen now, burning away the morning mist. In the harsh light of day, Redemption Falls looked exactly like what it was, a dying town making its last stand. Whether that stand would be its ending or its rebirth depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Ezra reached the base of the hill as Pike turned to face him. Around them the battle raged on, shots, screams, smoke. But for this moment, in this space, it came down to 2 men who knew how to fight, and 1 simple question: who wanted it more? The watch in Ezra's vest ticked steadily, counting down to the moment when everything would be decided. Colt Ramsey stood in the center of the street, his fancy coat torn and bloodied, a cut on his cheek still bleeding freely. 3 of his men lay dead or dying around him. His grand plan had collapsed into disaster. His reputation, the thing he valued more than money, more than life, was being destroyed in this forgotten town by an old man with a walking stick. Everything in him demanded that someone pay for that humiliation. Ezra stopped 30 feet away. Close enough to talk without shouting, far enough that drawing weapons would still be a test of speed and skill. "You don't have to die today," Ezra said. "Your men are beaten. Surrender. Stand trial. Take your punishment like a man." Surrender. Ramsey's laugh was harsh. To who? A broken-down sheriff who sold his soul for silver? A town full of shopkeepers and farmers who got lucky once? He spat blood into the dust. "I've spent 10 years building a name in this territory. I'm not letting it end like this. Your name is already dead. Whether you join it is up to you." Ramsey's hand hovered near his gun. "I'm faster than you, old man. I've been practicing since I was 12. Killed my first man in a draw when I was 15. I've beaten soldiers, outlaws, and hired guns who thought they were quick." His eyes were cold, certain. "You might have gotten lucky with my boys, but luck runs out. This isn't about luck. It's about choosing what kind of man you want to be in your last moments." Ezra's voice stayed calm, conversational. "You can die proud and stupid, or live humble and maybe learn something." "Learn what?" "That being weak gets you respect. That rolling over for every tin star who shows up is the right way to live." Ramsey shook his head. "I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees." "Those aren't the only choices. They're the only ones that matter." Around them, the town had gone silent. The shooting had stopped. Everyone who could stand was watching, defenders and gang members alike. This moment had become something more than a battle. It had become a judgment, a weighing of philosophies about how men should live and what they should value. Sheriff Brennan, bleeding from his leg wound but refusing to sit, called out, "Ramsey, it's over. Your men are surrendering. Don't throw your life away." "My life?" Ramsey turned slightly toward Brennan, and his contempt was visible. What would you know about life? You've been dead inside since I bought you. At least I lived by my own rules. You lived by hurting people. Martha's voice came from the church steps. There's no honor in that, no matter what you tell yourself. Ramsay looked up at her, this small, elderly woman who'd stood in her doorway while bullets flew, who'd rung her church bell like a battle cry, who'd refused to be moved by fear or threats. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Not quite shame, but perhaps a distant cousin of it. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold certainty of a man who'd decided how his story would end. "I'm done talking," he said, turning back to Ezra. "Draw when you're ready." Ezra's hand didn't move toward his gun. "I'm not going to draw on you, Ramsay." "What?" "I'm not going to kill you unless you force me to. That's the difference between us. You see killing as proving something. I see it as failing to find another way." Ramsay's face flushed with rage. "You think you're better than me? More righteous? You've killed plenty. I can see it in your eyes. Don't pretend you're any different." "I am different. I kill when I have to. You kill when you want to. That gap is the difference between law and chaos, between civilization and barbarism." High-minded words from a man with blood on his hands? Maybe. But I can live with the blood on my hands because I know I tried everything else first. Ezra took a step forward. "Last chance, Ramsay. Put down the gun. Face trial. Let this end without more dying." For a heartbeat, it seemed like Ramsay might actually consider it. His hand trembled slightly. His eyes searched Ezra's face as if looking for something. Permission, maybe, or understanding, or just a reason to choose life over death. Then the moment passed. "To hell with you," Ramsay snarled, and his hand dropped to his gun. He was fast. Everything he'd claimed about himself was true. The gun cleared leather in a motion so quick it seemed like one fluid movement. His aim was perfect, his finger already squeezing the trigger as the barrel came up toward Ezra's chest. But Ezra had seen the decision in Ramsay's eyes a half-second before the man moved. Had seen the moment when pride overcame survival, when ego trumped sense. That half-second of warning was enough. Ezra's draw was slower, 68-year-old reflexes fighting against younger muscle. But he didn't need to be faster. He just needed to be fast enough and more accurate. His shot came a fraction behind Ramsay's, but his aim was true. Both guns fired. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, rolled down the valley, and faded into silence. Ramsay's bullet had missed, rushed by overconfidence, thrown off by Ezra's subtle movement to the side. It passed through empty air where Ezra's chest had been a moment before. Ezra's bullet found its mark. Ramsay looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest with an expression of profound surprise. He'd been so certain of his own speed, his own superiority, that the reality of being outdrawn hadn't seemed possible until it happened. He took one step forward, then another, as if his body hadn't realized it was already dead. His gun slipped from his fingers. He opened his mouth to speak, but only blood came out. Then Colt Ramsay, who'd terrorized a territory for years and built his entire identity on being faster and meaner than everyone else, fell face first into the dust of Redemption Falls and moved no more. Silence held for a long moment. Then the last three standing members of the Shadow Creek gang dropped their weapons and raised their hands. The battle was over. The aftermath of violence is always quieter than the violence itself. As the gun smoke cleared and the ringing in everyone's ears faded, the true cost of the morning revealed itself in the harsh sunlight. Doc Henley, his shoulder bandaged by Martha's capable hands, moved through the street cataloging injuries. Michael Harrington had taken a bullet through his left arm, painful but not fatal. Tom Crawford had been grazed across his ribs. One of the defenders, a quiet rancher named Samuel Wade, had been killed by a lucky shot through the general store window. He'd been 63, a widower with grown children in California who would need to be notified. Sheriff Brennan's leg wound was serious but manageable. The bullet had passed through muscle without hitting bone. He'd walk with a limp for a while, but he'd walk. He sat on the church steps while Doc cleaned and dressed the wound, his face set in an expression that mixed pain, relief, and something that might have been peace. The surviving gang members, Pike Dawson with his broken arm, and 3 others too injured or frightened to fight anymore, were secured in the sheriff's office under guard. They'd face territorial justice once the marshal could be summoned. Their days of terrorizing anyone were over. Pearl's saloon had taken significant damage. Windows shot out, furniture splintered, bottles broken. She surveyed the wreckage with her hands on her hips and announced that she'd seen worse after Saturday nights, when miners got paid. At least this time it was for a good cause, she said, already making mental plans for repairs. By afternoon, the evacuees began returning from the canyon. They came slowly, uncertain, hardly daring to believe the town still stood. When they saw the survivors, saw the captured outlaws, saw that impossible victory had been snatched from the jaws of certain defeat, they wept openly. Martha stood on the church steps, her Bible held close, as families reunited and friends embraced. She'd lived through her husband's death, her son's deaths, decades of slow decline and disappointment. But today, she'd seen her town fight back and win. She'd seen ordinary people become extraordinary through courage and collective will. "We did it," Pearl said, joining her on the steps. "I still can't quite believe it." "Faith and action," Martha replied. "They've always been the combination that moves mountains." Ezra spent the day helping with repairs and recovery. He was exhausted to his bones, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline crash, but there was work to be done. Samuel Wade needed to be prepared for burial. Wounded needed ongoing care. The physical damage to buildings needed to be assessed and documented. But more than that, people needed to see him, needed to thank him, needed to tell him their stories about the battle, about what they'd felt, about the moment they realized they might actually survive. He listened to each one patiently, never hurrying them, understanding that this was part of the healing too. As evening approached, he found himself back at the cemetery on the hill. Samuel Wade had been buried beside his late wife under the shade of a cottonwood tree. The service had been simple, but heartfelt. Now, as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Ezra stood alone among the graves. He found Jacob Whitfield's marker again and stood before it for a long moment. "We held your town," he said quietly. "Cost us one good man, and several more are hurt. But we held it. Your wife still lives in your house. The church you helped build still stands. And the people here remember what it means to stand for something." The wind stirred the branches overhead. A hawk circled in the distance, riding thermals toward its nest. The mountains stood eternal on the horizon, indifferent to human struggles, but beautiful nonetheless. Martha's voice came from behind him. "Jacob would have liked you." Ezra turned. She'd approached silently, moving with the careful steps of someone whose bones ached, but whose spirit remained unbroken. "I was just paying my respects," he said. "I know. I saw you from the house." She joined him at the grave. "You're planning to leave soon, aren't you?" "I hadn't decided." "Yes, you have. I can see it in your eyes. You're already saying goodbye." He was quiet for a moment. "My cabin's been empty for nearly a week. Winter's coming. I need to prepare. Your cabin will still be there next week or next month." She looked at him directly. "But this town needs you, Ezra. Not just for fighting, for rebuilding, for reminding us what we're capable of. You don't need me for that. You proved today what you're capable of. We proved we can follow a good leader. That's different from not needing one." She reached into her apron and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When she unfolded it, Ezra saw his father's silver pocket watch. He touched his vest pocket, found it empty. "When did you—" "During the battle. I was treating Doc's shoulder and noticed it had fallen from your pocket. Thought I'd better keep it safe." She held it out to him, but didn't let go when he took it. "Your father carried this while serving the law. You carried it for 28 years doing the same. Then you put it away and hid in the mountains, thinking that chapter of your life was over. It was over. Was it? Or were you just running from it?" She released the watch. "Today you picked up that duty again. Wore it like a second skin, and I hope you remembered why you wore it in the first place." Ezra opened the watch, checked the time. The mechanism ticked steadily, faithfully, unchanged by the violence it had witnessed. "I wore it because my father taught me that some men are called to stand between good people and bad things, and that duty doesn't end just because it gets hard." "No, it doesn't," Martha smiled. "So I'm asking you, not on behalf of the town, but as a favor to an old woman who's seen too much death and not enough hope, stay a while. Come to town more than once a month. Let people get to know you. Let yourself be part of something again." "I don't know if I can." "You already did. You stepped into that street on Tuesday morning when you could have ridden away. Everything after that was just following through on a choice you'd already made." Sheriff Brennan appeared at the base of the hill, limping heavily but moving under his own power. He saw them and waved. "We should go," Martha said. "There's a supper being organized. Town wants to celebrate, or mourn, or both." Ezra took one last look at Jacob Whitfield's grave, then at the town spread out below them. Redemption Falls looked different now, not just because of the battle damage or the evening light. It looked like a place that had earned its name, a place where redemption was possible if you were willing to fight for it. "I'll stay through winter," he heard himself say. "Help with rebuilding. Make sure the town's truly secure before I leave." Martha's smile was radiant. "That's all I'm asking." They walked down the hill together as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows that stretched toward tomorrow. Behind them, the watch in Ezra's pocket ticked steadily onward, marking time in a life that had finally found purpose again. In the town below, people were gathering, lanterns were being lit, food was being shared, stories were being told. A community that had nearly died was learning to live again, and in learning to live, was teaching itself to hope. That hope, fragile and hard-won, was worth more than all the gold that had ever been pulled from these mountains. It was the kind of treasure that couldn't be stolen, only earned. And today, the people of Redemption Falls had earned it in full. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The territorial marshal would need to be contacted. The captured outlaws would need to be transported for trial. Samuel Wade's family would need to be notified. Buildings would need to be repaired. Life would continue with all its complications and demands. But tonight there was supper and community and the simple miracle of survival. Tonight there was gratitude for each breath, each heartbeat, each moment of continued existence. And walking down the hill with Martha beside him, his father's watch keeping time in his pocket, Ezra Cole felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. He felt like he was home,